furious Arab billionaire was on his way out the door until a janitor's daughter spoke for words that made him freeze. She was just a janitor, scrubbing marble floors no one noticed. Her daughter? A shy 10-year-old who barely spoke. But when a mistake worth millions threatened the most powerful man in the city, everything stopped. Who pointed this out? Sheikh Nasser demanded, his voice echoing through the hall. All eyes turned. Not to an executive, not to a banker, but to the little girl holding her mother's hand. What happened next silenced the entire boardroom and changed both their lives forever. A billionaire's footsteps echoed through marble halls, but his eyes never once fell on the little girl cleaning them. The morning air inside the Al-Rashid Conference Center was heavy with polish and quiet labor. Sunlight spilled through tall glass windows, bouncing off the marble floors. Businessmen in pressed suits hurried past, carrying phones, papers, and the weight of importance. Their voices filled the air, measured, confident, dismissive. Among them, unnoticed, bent a woman with tired eyes. Her name was Layla, 40 years old, shoulders narrow from years of strain. She wore a navy blue janitor's uniform, too loose at the wrists, with a ring of keys that clinked faintly at her side. Her hands moved steadily, wiping down a brass railing polished so often it barely needed her touch. But her pace never slowed. Time was money here, and hers belonged to the clock. Just behind her, moving as if invisible, was her daughter. Elsa, 10 years old, with pale blonde hair tied neatly back in a braid, followed silently. She wasn't dressed like the others. No uniform, no polished shoes. Just a plain cotton dress and worn sandals. She carried a small school bag, though there was no school today. There never was when Layla worked overtime. Debt did not wait for teacher schedules. The debt pressed down on every breath. Electricity bills folded unpaid on the kitchen counter. Rent overdue. Layla had long since stopped calculating how many extra hours she would need to keep the apartment. Elsa knew. She saw her mother's face when the envelopes came. She heard the sighs at night. And so, Elsa stayed with her, the janitor's daughter. Not because she belonged in this world of polished marble and gold-trimmed elevators, but because her mother could not afford someone to watch her. People walked by them as if they were part of the walls. A man in a gray suit stepped around Elsa without a word. A secretary in heels brushed past, her perfume trailing behind. Not one pair of eyes lowered to the child. Not one voice offered greeting. Elsa sat on a low wooden bench near the corner, her small legs swinging above the floor. From her bag, she took out a worn notebook. She wrote in neat, precise lines, copying words she had memorized, words no one here knew she carried. Her lips moved soundlessly, whispering syllables as she studied. Nearby, Layla looked back once, just once. A soft glance, protective, quick. Then she lowered her head again, cloth to railing, and carried on. Outside the great glass doors, a black limousine slowed to a halt. Its arrival went unnoticed by the workers, but it was only a matter of time before its presence shifted the air inside. And with that, the quiet rhythm of their morning was about to change. The lobby of the Al-Rashid Conference Center moved like a river. Voices rose and fell, papers rustled, footsteps clicked against polished stone. Everything seemed urgent, yet practiced. It was the rhythm of people who felt important. Elsa sat quietly at her corner bench, watching the current flow around her. She swung her legs gently, not restless but measured, as if she had learned long ago not to disturb the grown-up world. Layla moved with that same quiet rhythm. Mop, wring, polish. Lift the bucket, slide it against the wall, and begin again. Her back was straight, her motion steady. She didn't need praise. She only needed the hours to pass, each one building a fragile bridge against the bills waiting at home. The visitors glanced her way sometimes, but never long. They saw her uniform, her lowered head, her bent posture. They saw a janitor, not woman. Elsa noticed. She always noticed. A man in a sharp navy suit passed Elsa, speaking on his phone in clipped English. He didn't slow when his briefcase brushed against her knee. Elsa only tucked her legs closer and returned to her notebook. A few moments later, two young assistants walked by, whispering about deadlines. One pointed, almost absently, "That's the janitor's girl." They laughed softly, not unkindly, but as though she were something small and harmless, a fixture of the building. Elsa heard. She didn't react. Her pencil kept moving, scratching faintly across the page. Words in another script, another world, filled the lines. Layla glanced over from her work, the smallest flicker of her eyes. Protective, but quiet. Elsa gave a tiny nod back. A silent message between mother and daughter. I'm fine. The rhythm carried on. Elevators opened, doors shut, phones rang. The people above walked tall, and the ones below stayed bent. It was a pattern Elsa knew by heart. And then, in the distance, heavy doors opened with a slow hush. The sound was different from the rest, measured, deliberate, carrying weight. Heads turned. The rhythm shifted, subtle but certain. A man stepped inside, tall and dark-eyed, his suit tailored in a way that set him apart. Two aides trailed him, speaking quickly while he ignored them. His stride was purposeful, and though no one dared meet his gaze directly, his presence bent the air around him. Layla lowered her head, cloth still circling the brass rail. Elsa looked up only once, then back to her notebook. But her pencil slowed. The day's steady rhythm had been broken, and with the break came the first disturbance, though no one yet knew it. The tall man, Karim al-Farouki, known to the staff only as the Billionaire, strode through the lobby. His presence drew murmurs, then silence. His suit was deep charcoal, cut with precision. A heavy watch gleamed faintly at his wrist. His eyes swept the room, searching, measuring, already impatient. Elsa felt it before she saw it. The air tightening, the staff straightening, even her mother lowering her pace. Layla's hand tightened on the railing cloth, pressing harder, polishing what already shone. Karim paused near the reception desk. His aide, a younger man in a slim gray suit, leaned in. Sir, the translators aren't here yet. The files, we are still waiting for confirmation. Karim's jaw tightened. His voice came low, edged with steel. I do not wait for incompetence. The receptionist, pale and nervous, fumbled with her papers. She whispered, We're trying, sir. The guest from Abu Dhabi arrives shortly, and we. Karim's gaze silenced her. He turned, scanning the lobby, his expression unreadable. Elsa had been watching from her bench. Quiet, unnoticed. She recognized the sounds spilling from the aide's tablet, phrases in Arabic, half-translated notes scrolling on the screen. The words were broken, clumsy. She whispered them under her breath, correcting them softly, as if to herself. It slipped out. A reflex. She couldn't help it. The receptionist dropped a folder, papers fluttering across the polished floor. A frantic pause followed. Elsa, without thinking, slid from her bench, gathered the papers, and held them out with both hands. Her voice came small but clear. Here. They go in this order. The receptionist blinked, confused. How do you? Elsa's lips moved again, this time forming Arabic syllables. Smooth, unbroken, like water flowing. She spoke the phrase on the top sheet as it was meant to sound. Not like the broken attempts of the aid software. Not like someone stumbling through a foreign tongue. For a moment, the lobby stilled. The billionaire's head turned. His dark eyes locked on the child holding the papers. Layla froze mid-step, cloth still in her hand. She had seen this coming, someday, somehow, but prayed it would not happen here. Not under so many eyes. Karim's gaze narrowed, his stride stopping. His aides shifted uncomfortably, one whispering, It's just a child. But the man's focus did not waver. Elsa lowered her eyes again, placing the papers carefully back on the counter. She returned to her bench without hurry, as though nothing had happened. But the silence that followed was no longer ordinary. And in that silence, one man had noticed more than he intended to. Karim al-Farouki did not move at first. He stood tall, motionless, while the aides fumbled to regain the rhythm of their work. The receptionist thanked Elsa quickly, her voice nervous, as though afraid to draw further attention. But attention was already drawn. Karim's eyes lingered on the child. Elsa sat on her bench once again, notebook open, pencil steady. She did not fidget under his gaze. She did not shrink. Her lips moved soundlessly, tracing words that no one else cared to notice. His aide bent close. Sir, the cars are ready upstairs. We can proceed. Karim did not answer. His silence stretched long enough that the aide shifted on his feet. Then, without a word, the billionaire turned slightly, as though to continue forward. But his head moved back once more, a small flicker of attention, back toward the little girl. Layla saw it. Her pulse tightened. She straightened from her railing, cloth still in hand, and placed herself slightly closer to her daughter's corner. Not directly. She could not block a man like him, but close enough to be seen as protector. Kareem's gaze shifted briefly to her. He read the posture, the lowered eyes, the uniform. A janitor. Invisible again. But then his eyes returned to Elsa. He noted the braid, the steady hand, the faint movement of lips repeating words not her own. A flicker, perhaps recognition, perhaps memory, passed across his face. He turned away, resuming his walk toward the elevators. Yet his steps were slower now. The lobby exhaled. People moved again, the brief freeze forgotten. But not by Kareem, not by Layla, and not by Elsa, though she gave no sign. She simply closed her notebook, placed it neatly in her lap, and sat still. At the elevator, Kareem raised one hand. His aide pressed the button. The doors slid open, revealing the mirrored walls within. He stepped inside, but just before the doors closed, his eyes turned one last time across the lobby. They met Elsa's, just for an instant. The doors shut. The silence returned. Layla exhaled slowly, clutching her cloth tighter. She knew what that glance meant. Not dismissal, not curiosity, something else, something heavier. And she knew her daughter had just stepped out of invisibility. The stillness would not last long. The man would not leave it there. The lobby settled back into its hum, but under the surface, unease lingered. Layla's hands moved faster over the brass, almost as though polishing could erase what had just happened. Elsa sat quietly, her notebook balanced across her knees, pencil tip resting idle. She did not write. She simply waited. Moments later, the elevator doors opened again. Kareem Al-Farouki stepped out, not with his aides this time, but alone. The murmurs rose, then hushed. His presence made space, clearing paths without him speaking a word. His stride was slower now, measured. He walked toward the janitor's corner. Heads turned. The receptionist froze mid-call. A security guard shifted uneasily near the wall. Layla straightened, the cloth still damp in her hand. She placed herself a little ahead of Elsa, not blocking, but near enough. Her voice came soft, careful. "Sir, can I?" Kareem raised a hand slightly, not dismissive, not unkind, but final. His gaze lowered, not to Layla, but to Elsa. He stopped a few steps away. His voice, when it came, was calm, even. "What did you say earlier?" Elsa looked up, meeting his eyes without flinching. Her voice was small, almost too soft for the wide lobby. "The phrase was wrong. I only fixed it." Kareem studied her, head tilting slightly. "You speak Arabic?" Elsa nodded once. "Yes." No flourish. No pride. Just fact. Kareem glanced toward her notebook, then back to her. "Who taught you?" Elsa hesitated. Her eyes flicked, for the briefest second, toward her mother. Then back. "I learned." The pause hung heavy. Her answer was honest, but not complete. Kareem seemed to recognize it. His expression did not change, but his silence deepened, like a man measuring more than words. Layla stepped forward slightly, her voice quiet but steady. "She's only a child, sir." Kareem looked at her. A flicker of something unreadable passed across his face. Acknowledgement, perhaps respect. Then he returned his gaze to Elsa. "You corrected my aide," he said. "And you were right." Elsa nodded again. She did not smile. She did not boast. She simply met the truth with calm acceptance. Kareem lingered a moment longer. His eyes stayed on her as though he was searching for something familiar, something he could not yet name. Finally, he turned slightly, motioning toward the elevators. "Come upstairs. Bring your mother." Gasps rippled quietly across the lobby. A janitor and her child, summoned upstairs by a man who rarely summoned anyone. Layla's breath caught. Elsa stood, slipping her notebook into her small bag, her composure unbroken. The marble floors behind them gleamed as they followed him. And the world ahead was nothing like the one they had known below. The elevator doors closed with a soft hiss. Inside, mirrors lined the walls, catching reflections of three lives drawn together by chance, or perhaps by something more. Kareem Al-Farouki stood tall in his charcoal suit, one hand in his pocket, the other resting lightly on the rail. He did not look at them directly, but his gaze in the mirrored wall lingered. Layla stood close behind her daughter, her janitor's uniform damp at the sleeves, her shoes worn thin from years of standing. She clasped her cleaning cloth in one hand, as though afraid to leave it behind. It was the symbol of her place here and of her debt. Without it, she was exposed. Elsa stood between them, small but steady. Her school bag hung from her shoulder, the notebook inside pressed against her ribs. Her braid rested neatly against her back, not a strand loose. She looked straight ahead, calm, as though riding elevators with billionaires was no more unusual than swinging her legs from the bench downstairs. The elevator chimed, doors sliding open onto the executive floor. The air was different here. The smell of polished wood and faint leather replaced the sharp scent of disinfectant. The lighting was softer, golden, meant not for work but for command. Employees in crisp attire glanced up as the trio entered. Some froze, confusion flickering across their faces. Others lowered their eyes quickly, pretending not to see. No one spoke. Kareem walked ahead without a word. His stride was purposeful, leading them past glass offices and long tables where assistants typed furiously. Layla felt the weight of eyes pressing into her back. A janitor did not belong here. A janitor's daughter, even less. Still, Elsa walked with a composure that seemed beyond her years. She did not clutch her mother's arm, nor shrink from the stairs. Her steps were quiet, precise. She had learned long ago how to move unnoticed, but here, she was not invisible. Every whisper seemed to follow her. At last, Kareem stopped before a wide oak door. He opened it himself, not waiting for aides. The room beyond was larger than their apartment, walls lined with bookshelves, maps, and dark leather chairs. A long window framed the city skyline, its towers gleaming under the midday sun. He motioned for them to enter. Layla hesitated, one hand gently touching Elsa's shoulder as if to shield her. But Elsa stepped forward first. She moved into the room with the same quiet poise she had carried in the lobby, as though the air of importance did not frighten her. Kareem closed the door behind them. The sound was soft, but final, and in that room of power, their past would begin to surface, piece by piece. The office was hushed, the kind of silence that demanded honesty. Kareem crossed to the wide desk of dark walnut, removing his watch and setting it carefully upon a leather pad. He did not sit. Instead, he leaned lightly against the desk, arms folded, his eyes on Elsa. "Tell me," he said simply, "how a janitor's daughter speaks Arabic with such precision." Layla stiffened. The words carried no insult in tone, but the truth of their weight pressed on her. She drew in a breath, ready to answer, but Elsa spoke first. "I learned it from books. Old ones. My grandfather had them." Kareem tilted his head. "Grandfather?" Elsa nodded. Her braid slipped over her shoulder as she looked down, her fingers brushing the strap of her bag. "He was a teacher. He told me stories. Some in Arabic, some in other languages. He said words are keys. If you hold enough of them, you can open any door." Her voice was steady, neither proud nor shy. Just truth laid bare. Kareem's eyes narrowed slightly, studying her not as a child, but as a bearer of something rare. "And where is he now?" A pause. Elsa's lips pressed tight before she spoke. "He is gone." Layla stepped forward, her voice quiet, protective. "He died when Elsa was very small. She remembers him more in words than in pictures." Kareem's gaze shifted to her. "And you allowed her to keep learning?" Layla nodded, her eyes lowered. "It was all we had. His books, his lessons. I could not give her money or tutors. Only the pages he left behind." Elsa added softly. "And Mother always told me to finish what I start, even if no one sees it." The silence stretched again. Kareem turned, his eyes moving briefly toward the tall shelves lined with polished leather volumes. Then back to the small girl before him, who spoke of words as keys. He asked no further questions. "Not yet." Layla smoothed the damp cloth in her hand, though it had no purpose here. Her gaze touched Elsa's for a moment, soft, grounding. She had revealed enough. Too much, perhaps. Kareem straightened from the desk. His voice came low, even. "You speak as though discipline is natural to you. That is not common for a child." Elsa's reply was simple. "It is natural when you have little else." For the first time, a faint flicker passed Kareem's face. Not a smile, but something near it. Memory, perhaps recognition. He looked away, toward the skyline burning gold through the glass. And so the first layer of her story lay open, enough to stir his interest, but not yet the whole truth. The silence of the office held steady. Outside the tall windows, the city shimmered in sunlight, but inside, time slowed. Kareem's eyes moved from the skyline back to the girl, as though weighing what he had heard against what he still did not know. "Books alone do not give such fluency," he said at last. His tone was not accusing, only certain. Elsa's fingers tightened on the strap of her bag. She lifted her chin just slightly. I read. Every day, even when the lights were cut. Layla flinched faintly at that, a truth spoken too plainly. Her voice came soft, low, almost ashamed. There were nights, months, even, when we could not pay the bills. She read by candlelight. I told her to rest, but she did not listen. Elsa added, not with pride but with quiet matter-of-factness. Languages do not wait for bills. The words hung heavy. Layla lowered her eyes, her hand brushing her daughter's shoulder, as though to soften them. She has always been like this. Once she begins, she does not stop. Even when she paused, swallowing. Even when I asked her to help me work. Kareem's gaze deepened. You had her work? Layla's head shook quickly. No, never. She is a child. But when I could not afford school, I thought, better she rest, better she play. But she refused. She sat in corners with books too heavy for her hands. A flicker passed Elsa's face then. For the first time, her calm cracked slightly. It wasn't only for me. Her voice softened. It was so you wouldn't feel alone. Layla's breath caught. She turned her face away quickly, blinking hard. Her shoulders, usually so straight from years of quiet endurance, slumped for a moment. Kareem saw it. His expression did not change, but his silence stretched long enough to suggest he understood. He walked slowly to the bookshelves, running his hand across the spines of gilded volumes, many unopened for years. His voice came without turning. Discipline born of hardship. A gift and a curse. Elsa said nothing. She sat still, composed, her small hands folded over her notebook resting in her lap. At last, Kareem turned back. His gaze swept across them both, the child, upright and calm, the mother, weary but unbroken. His voice was measured, as though sealing an unseen decision. I understand enough. Layla exhaled softly, though tension remained in her frame. She knew this was only the beginning. And so the story pressed deeper. Hardship had shaped the child, but soon her discipline would be tested in the present, not just the past. The stillness of the office broke when a knock rattled the oak door. One of Kareem's aides entered, face pale, tablet clutched tight against his chest. Sir, the guest from Abu Dhabi is here already. The translators, still delayed. His voice shook with the weight of failure. They are calling from the airport, but traffic. Kareem raised a hand. Silence fell. His gaze slid back to Elsa. The room seemed smaller as his eyes lingered on the girl, then to her mother. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, his words came quiet, deliberate. Bring her. The aide blinked. Sir. Kareem's tone sharpened just slightly, the edge of command flashing through. Bring them both. The aide hesitated, glancing at Layla's uniform, at Elsa's small frame. But he did not argue. He bowed his head and stepped aside, waiting. Layla's heart pounded. She tightened her grip on her daughter's shoulder. Sir, she is a child. This is not her place. But Elsa looked up at her mother. Her voice was soft but certain. You always told me, finish what I start. Layla froze. The echo of her own words struck harder than any order. Kareem watched quietly, no impatience in his gaze now, only expectation. Elsa rose from her chair, smoothing the hem of her simple cotton dress. She picked up her bag, the notebook pressed firmly against her chest. Her steps were light but steady as she walked toward the door. Layla followed, her hand brushing against Elsa's back in a gesture half protective, half surrender. At the doorway, she bent low, whispering into her daughter's ear. Be careful, Habibti. Speak only what is true. Elsa gave a small nod. Together they stepped into the long corridor, where the air was heavier, charged with anticipation. Staff members looked up from their desks, staring as the janitor and her daughter walked past the glass walls of power, following the billionaire. Some frowned, others whispered, and a few simply watched in silence. At the far end of the corridor, the doors to the boardroom waited. Behind them, men in suits, one powerful guest, and a conversation no child should be expected to join. Layla stopped at the threshold, her lips pressed tight. She placed both hands gently on Elsa's shoulders, looking into her daughter's calm blue eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Layla managed one small sentence. I will wait just here. Elsa nodded again, stepping forward as the door opened wide. And so, for the first time, the child stepped across the threshold of a room where only power was meant to speak. The boardroom was vast and hushed, its long polished table gleaming under recessed lights. Around it sat a circle of men in tailored suits, their hands resting on leather folders, their faces sharpened by expectation. At the far end, Sheikh Nasser al-Mansour, the guest from Abu Dhabi, waited. His robe was spotless white, his keffiyeh bound neatly with a black agal. His eyes, deep and stern, scanned the room with restrained patience. Karim entered first, his presence commanding. Behind him, Elsa followed, small in her plain dress, her school bag hanging from one shoulder. Conversations faltered as eyes fell on her. A child? Here? At the table of billionaires? Elsa did not shrink. She paused just inside the door, her gaze steady, hands folded neatly before her. Karim spoke, his tone crisp. Gentlemen, Sheikh Nasser has arrived. Our translators have not. A ripple of unease moved through the room. Eyes darted toward one another. Excuses were half-formed on lips. Then Karim continued, his gaze sweeping across them all. But we have someone else. He turned slightly, his dark eyes resting on Elsa. This girl will translate. A stunned silence followed. One man muttered under his breath, a janitor's child? Another stifled a laugh, quickly silenced by Karim's sharp glance. Elsa stepped forward. Her small sandals tapped quietly against the polished floor. She approached the table, placed her bag carefully on a chair, and stood upright, facing Sheikh Nasser. The sheikh looked at her long and hard, his brows drawn. Then he spoke, a single line in Arabic, his tone deliberate, as though testing. Without hesitation, Elsa answered. Her words flowed clear, smooth, without falter. The sound of her Arabic filled the boardroom like a current no one expected. A pause followed. The sheikh's stern face softened slightly, surprise flickering in his eyes. He asked another question, longer this time, words winding in nuance. Elsa listened intently, her head tilted just slightly, then replied with precision. This time, Karim himself translated the meaning aloud for the others. Not a stumble, not a hesitation. Perfectly conveyed. The men around the table shifted in their seats. Their faces moved from skepticism to quiet astonishment. One leaned back slowly, his eyes fixed on the small blonde girl who spoke with the confidence of a scholar. Another rubbed his temple, whispering, unbelievable. Elsa never smiled, never sought approval. She simply performed the task as though it were natural, her small voice carrying strength beyond her years. At the doorway, Layla stood half-hidden, her hands clasped tightly before her. Her eyes shone with a restrained pride she dared not display too openly. She breathed slowly, silently, watching her daughter stand taller than men twice her age. And with those words, the room shifted. The child had proved herself, not with noise, but with truth. When the meeting adjourned, the boardroom emptied with unusual quiet. Men who usually left with ringing phones and loud opinions now walked slower, their faces unsettled, their words hushed. Elsa gathered her notebook and bag without hurry, her movements careful, precise. She said nothing. She needed to say nothing. Her role was done. At the door, Sheikh Nasser paused. He looked down at her, his lined face unreadable. Then, in Arabic, he spoke one sentence softly. Elsa replied just as softly, her voice clear and respectful. The sheikh gave a single nod. Then he left, his aides trailing behind him. For a long moment, no one else in the corridor spoke. Then the murmurs began. She's just a janitor's girl, one aide whispered. But did you hear her? Not even the translators could, another answered, his tone equal parts disbelief and awe. A secretary, clutching her clipboard, murmured to a colleague. She sounded like she was born to it. Not all whispers were kind. One man muttered under his breath, it's a trick. She memorized a few phrases. That's all. But the ripple spread, whether in admiration or suspicion. Every set of eyes that turned toward the small blonde child carried a different story, curiosity, doubt, respect, envy. Elsa felt it. She always felt it. She walked calmly beside her mother, her gaze forward, her expression unchanged. Layla, however, could not ignore it. Fragments of gossip reached her ears like small blows. She tightened her jaw, lowered her gaze, and kept close to her daughter's side. She knew admiration could turn quickly into resentment. Karim followed a few steps behind them, silent, his expression unreadable. He heard the whispers too, but he did not stop them. He let them spread. At the elevator, a young assistant stepped aside hurriedly, holding the door open. He cast Elsa a long look, half disbelief, half respect, as she stepped inside with her mother. The ride down was quiet. Layla's hand rested lightly on Elsa's shoulder, her thumb brushing the strap of the school bag. Her lips pressed tight, as if holding back words of warning. Elsa only looked straight ahead, her braid resting neatly against her back, her face calm. She had entered invisible. Now she could not hide, even if she wished. The lobby doors opened. People turned as the pair stepped out, whispers already waiting for them below. And from those whispers, the question of who she was would no longer stay silent. The lobby was restless now. Word had moved faster than footsteps. Secretaries glanced from their desks, guards shifted uneasily, and even the receptionist who once dismissed Elsa now stared openly. Layla felt each glance like a weight pressing down on her back. She wished she could shield her daughter from it, hide her away before envy twisted into something harsher. But Elsa walked calmly, her small steps unhurried, as if she carried no burden at all. At the center of the lobby, Kareem stopped. His aides clustered around, papers and tablets in their hands, whispering updates about schedules and calls. He raised a hand. Silence followed instantly. He turned, his voice carrying across the polished stone. This child is not here by accident. His eyes swept across the onlookers. She holds a skill most of you do not. She has earned respect. A ripple spread. Some heads lowered. Others stared harder, skeptical. But no one spoke. Kareem continued, quieter now, speaking directly to Elsa. I will not insult you with token gestures. What you carry deserves more than applause. If you choose, I will see to it you receive proper study, proper training, and access to what your gift requires. Not charity. Recognition. Layla's breath caught. She stepped closer, her hand brushing her daughter's arm. Her voice was cautious, respectful, but firm. Sir, she is young. Too young for promises that bind her life. Kareem met her eyes. There was no irritation in his face, only certainty. I do not bind. I open doors. The choice is hers. The crowd waited. Elsa stood still, her notebook clutched close to her chest. She looked from her mother to the tall man before her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, her answer came quiet, steady. I do not want to be a gesture. If it is because of the words, then yes. I will study. Kareem inclined his head, a movement both solemn and final. So it shall be. The aides scribbled furiously, already making arrangements. The receptionist glanced between them, wide-eyed. A guard muttered under his breath, incredible. Layla stood rooted, torn between pride and fear. She reached out, brushing her daughter's hair from her face, her hand trembling just slightly. Elsa leaned gently against her side, calm, composed, as though the weight of the moment sat easily on her shoulders. And with that, the child's place shifted. No longer invisible, no longer whispered about. Seen. The following afternoon, Elsa and her mother returned. Layla wore the same neat gray uniform, freshly washed, her hair tied back tighter than usual. Beside her, Elsa wore a pale blue dress, simple but clean, her braid looped over one shoulder. She clutched her small notebook as though it were a shield. They were escorted not toward the cleaning closets or staff entrance, but into the executive wing itself. The carpet softened their steps, the air faintly scented with cedar and polished leather. Paintings lined the walls, desert landscapes, calligraphy, and portraits of past leaders. Every detail spoke of a world they did not belong to. Layla's shoulders stiffened. She stayed close, her eyes lowered, but she remained beside her daughter like a quiet shadow. The doors to the main conference room opened. Inside sat men and women in tailored suits, their pens poised, screens glowing with charts. At the head of the table sat Sheikh Nasser, robed in spotless white, his black agal gleaming under the light. Conversations stilled the moment Elsa entered. All eyes turned to her. Some eyebrows lifted. Some lips tightened. She was 10 years old, and yet she was walking into a place seasoned advisors feared to tread. Kareem gestured toward the seat beside him. Sit. Elsa obeyed, sliding into the leather chair. Her feet dangled above the floor, but her back remained straight, her expression calm. Whispers moved down the table. One man muttered under his breath, "This is absurd." Another frowned, leaning toward his colleague. "We're wasting time." But Sheikh Nasser silenced them with a look. His deep-set eyes rested on Elsa, studying her. Slowly, he leaned forward. "Your words yesterday Were they learned? Or lived? The room waited. Elsa looked down for a brief moment, then back at him. Both, she said softly. Learned because I studied. Lived because they were my father's. A stillness fell. Even Kareem glanced at her, curious now. Layla's fingers tightened around the strap of her small handbag. She had not expected her daughter to speak of him here, in this room. Sheikh Nasser did not look away. His voice lowered. Then let us see how well you carry what he gave you. The table leaned closer. The test was no longer whispered. It was at hand. The conference room was hushed, the only sound the faint buzz of the projector. Charts of losses and forecasts flickered across the screen. An aide whispered figures, his voice faltering as he explained the financial problem that had unsettled the entire company. A stalled contract with a Gulf partner who refused to move forward. They will not sign, the aide finished, glancing nervously toward Sheikh Nasser. They say our approach is clumsy, disrespectful. They are threatening to withdraw. All eyes turned toward the head of the table. Nasser's jaw tightened. Kareem leaned slightly forward, then turned to Elsa. Translate this, he said, handing her a printed letter, formal Arabic from the partner's office. Elsa's small hands unfolded the paper. Her eyes moved carefully over the words. The script was precise, heavy with subtle phrasing, the kind that hid meaning beneath courtesy. She looked up, her voice even. They are not refusing. They are waiting. They want respect shown first. The letter asks for acknowledgement of their lineage and contribution before business. Murmurs spread. One man shook his head. Impossible. We cannot. Elsa's voice, soft but certain, cut through. It is not impossible. It is culture. If you do not honor the father, the son will not listen. The room froze. Several advisors exchanged startled glances. Sheikh Nasser sat back slowly, studying her with a gaze that weighed more than words. Finally, he nodded once. Correct. Kareem gestured. Then, child, draft the words. A thick silence followed. Elsa reached for her notebook, the same one she always carried. Her pencil scratched softly across the page as she wrote in careful script, then slid it toward Kareem. He read, his lips moving silently. His brows rose. Without a word, he passed it to Sheikh Nasser. The old man read it twice. Then his deep voice filled the room. This is how it is done. The advisors were speechless. Layla sat near the wall, her hands tightly clasped, her heart thundering. Her daughter, 10 years old, had just spoken with the authority of generations. The silence broke not with protest, but with the sound of pens scratching, aides rushing to send the message she had written. The response to Elsa's drafted words was immediate. Within the hour, the Gulf partner replied, not only softened but openly respectful. The message praised the acknowledgement of their lineage, saying it restored dignity to their house. They requested a new meeting, this time with a willingness to sign. The room shifted. The weight that had hung over the conference table lifted. For the first time that day, shoulders relaxed. Whispers carried notes of relief instead of tension. Kareem exhaled, leaning back in his chair. His eyes, usually sharp and narrow, lingered on the girl who had written what no one else could. Sheikh Nasser, however, did not move quickly. He sat very still, studying her. Then, slowly he rose. His white robe brushed against the polished floor as he circled the table. The advisors straightened, nervous in the silence that followed. He stopped beside Elsa's chair. She looked up at him, her braid resting over her shoulder, her hands folded on the notebook she had used. Her feet still dangled above the ground, too short to reach the floor, but her back remained straight. Child, Nasser said, his voice carrying the quiet force of authority, you have saved us more than money. You have restored respect where it was slipping away. The room was silent. He turned toward the gathered executives. From this day, she will not be treated as a curiosity. She will be given the means to learn, to grow, to carry her gift further. He lifted his hand, signaling to Kareem. The younger man retrieved a folder from his leather case and placed it before Elsa. Inside lay a thick, formal document, a scholarship certificate to the most prestigious language academy in the region. Fully funded. No conditions. And for her mother, Nasser continued, turning his gaze to Layla at the edge of the room. A position fitting her dignity. Not a cleaner's life, but one of stewardship. She will oversee the care of these halls, with staff under her. Layla's breath caught. Her hand flew to her lips, though she lowered it quickly, struggling to contain herself. Finally, Nasser added, his voice softer now. And because your words today prevented losses in the millions, you will receive what is owed. He gestured. An aide carried forward an envelope thick with documents, a grant, a sum enough to erase their debts and give them a home free of worry. Tears welled in Layla's eyes, though she tried to hide them. Elsa touched her mother's hand gently, steadying her. The crowd, once skeptical, now rose in unison, clapping softly, reverently. For the first time, mother and daughter were not invisible. They were seen, honored, and lifted into the light. The applause faded slowly, leaving behind a hum of whispered conversations. Yet the recognition did not end with Sheikh Nasser's declaration. It lingered in the air, carried forward in gestures and glances, in the way people now regarded the small girl and her mother. Elsa and Layla were led out of the conference hall into the outer chamber, where the crowd had thinned. The heavy wooden doors closed, softening the noise inside. What followed was quieter, more personal. The first to approach was an older clerk, a man in his 60s with deep lines carved into his face. He had worked in those offices longer than most of the executives. His shirt was neatly pressed, though the cuffs were frayed with years of service. He stopped before Elsa, bowed his head slightly, and said in a low voice, "Your words reminded me of my father. He, too, once wrote letters that saved families from ruin. Thank you." He placed a folded piece of paper into her hand. She opened it later to find only 3 words, "Never stop writing." Then came a secretary who had watched them in silence for weeks, passing unnoticed as she carried files from one office to another. She bent near Layla, speaking quietly so others would not hear. "Your daughter gave courage to many today. Even those of us who clean and carry saw it. We know what it means." Her eyes glistened, though she quickly turned away before emotion betrayed her further. Not everyone was so direct. Some merely nodded at Elsa in the hallway, where before they would have stepped past her without a glance. Others touched Layla's arm lightly in passing, as if to say, "We see you now." The mother felt the weight of each gesture more deeply than words could express. For years she had scrubbed tiles, emptied bins, swept corridors, and been invisible. To have even one person meet her eyes with respect was almost more than she could bear. To have many, it broke something open inside her that had long been locked. Elsa, though younger, seemed calmer. She received each thank you with a small nod, as if it were not about her at all, but about the work itself. Still, when no one was looking, her hand tightened around her mother's, anchoring them both. Later, as the day stretched into evening, they sat briefly on a marble bench outside the building. The desert air was cooling. The city lights flickered awake one by one. Layla exhaled slowly, a sound between relief and disbelief. "Do you feel it, Mama?" Elsa asked softly. Layla nodded. "Yes, my child. For the first time, they see us." But even as gratitude bloomed, shadows lingered. Not all hearts welcomed their rise. The whispers of gratitude had barely settled when a new sound rose, a sharper voice, clipped and commanding. The crowd in the outer chamber shifted, making way for a man whose presence carried weight. Mr. Khalid al-Faruqi, chief financial officer of the Sheikh's vast enterprises, strode forward. He was in his late 50s, tall, with graying hair brushed immaculately back. His suit was darker than the rest, his shoes polished until they reflected the lights overhead. His expression was not softened by admiration, but sharpened with suspicion. "Enough indulgence," he said, his tone flat. "We are speaking of a child, not a savior." The room stilled. Those who had offered quiet thanks moments before lowered their eyes, afraid of being caught in the confrontation. Khalid's gaze fixed on Elsa. "Tell me, little one, do you even understand the weight of the numbers you speak of? These are not games. This is wealth that feeds cities. Mistakes cost lives." Elsa did not flinch. Her blue eyes remained steady, calm in the face of his scorn. She spoke simply. "I do not play with numbers. I see patterns. They tell me what is broken and how it can be mended." Khalid's lip curled slightly. "Patterns. Childish riddles. Sheikh Nasser places too much trust in novelty. I demand proof, here and now." Layla tensed beside her daughter. Instinct pressed her to shield Elsa, to step between her and the man's cold authority. But she caught herself. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment to let her daughter's voice stand without her own. She pressed her lips together and remained still, though her hands twisted against the fabric of her janitor's skirt. The silence stretched. Eyes darted between Elsa and Khalid, unsure who would speak next. Finally, Elsa answered, her voice low but unwavering. "You may test me, sir. But remember, when truth comes from a place you do not expect, it remains truth. Even from a child." A faint murmur ran through the crowd. Khalid stiffened, not used to being challenged, least of all by someone so small. His jaw clenched, but he gestured curtly toward the inner offices. "Very well. You will have your chance. Come." The weight of his words pressed down like a storm gathering. What had begun as recognition now teetered toward trial. Layla's eyes followed her daughter's slight figure as she stepped forward, her heart heavy with fear but also burning with pride. The test was no longer offered as honor. It was demanded as defense. The room braced for what was to come. The long corridor into the board chamber was silent but tense. Elsa's small shoes tapped against the marble floor, the sound swallowed quickly by the high ceiling. Layla followed one step behind, clutching her work apron tightly in her hands. She wished she could carry her daughter instead, protect her from the storm ahead. But Elsa walked on with a steady pace, as though she belonged there. The chamber doors opened. Inside, a large oval table dominated the room. Screens lined the walls, displaying streams of numbers and contracts in Arabic and English. Several advisors leaned back in leather chairs, whispering about the spectacle. At the head sat Sheikh Nasser, his expression grave but unreadable. Khalid stood beside him, eyes sharp, posture rigid. "This is the matter at hand," Khalid said, pointing to the screens. "A shipment of steel delayed in transit. Documents missing. Millions in penalty fees if not resolved today. Let us see if your prodigy has more than pretty words." The numbers filled the screens, a maze of figures, signatures, and codes. Advisors shifted in their seats, skeptical but curious. Elsa climbed onto a chair at the side of the table. Her small hands pressed against the polished surface as she leaned forward. Her lips moved silently, eyes flicking from one column to the next. The room, full of men twice and thrice her age, watched as the blonde child studied what they had labored over for days. Minutes stretched. The tension was unbearable. Layla's hands were folded tightly, knuckles white, her eyes fixed on her daughter. Then, Elsa spoke. Her voice was quiet but clear. "The contract for transit, it was not signed by the correct authority. Here." She pointed at the corner of one digital document. "This stamp is counterfeit. The real papers must be hidden, waiting, because someone knew penalties would make you pay more. But the cargo is safe. It has not moved." The advisors leaned in. One tapped rapidly on his tablet, cross-checking. His face drained of color. "She's right," he murmured. "The shipment is still at port. The penalty is false." The room erupted, half in disbelief, half in shock. Sheikh Nasser raised his hand, and silence fell. He turned to Khalid. "You demanded proof. There it is." Khalid's mouth opened, then closed. His pride fought against what lay undeniable before him. His silence was louder than any protest. Elsa sat back in her chair, calm as if she had merely solved a puzzle at school. Layla exhaled, her chest loosening at last. The child had cut through deceit where seasoned men had faltered. The doubters had no shield left against the truth. The chamber remained still, though the storm of whispers had quieted. Screens dimmed, advisors sat straighter, and for the first time that day, Sheikh Nasser's expression softened. He leaned forward, his deep voice steady. "Child," he said, "you cut through shadows where even trained men stumbled. Tell us, how did you see what we could not?" All eyes turned to Elsa. Her small frame looked even smaller in the vast leather chair. Yet her back was straight, her hands folded neatly on the polished table. Layla stood nearby, silent, her eyes moist but proud. Elsa took a breath. When she spoke, it was not with arrogance, nor with hesitation. "My mother taught me to look closely," she said quietly. "Not just at what is written, but what is missing. She taught me that when something feels wrong, it usually is. People overlook small marks because they trust what seems official, but truth hides in small things." The words hung in the air. Simple, plain, yet they carried a weight that silenced even Khalid. One of the advisors leaned back, murmuring, "Wisdom from a child." Another, older, closed his eyes as though recalling his own lessons long forgotten. Elsa looked around the table, her blue eyes calm. "You all have more knowledge than me, more experience. But sometimes experience makes us hurry, makes us trust the wrong stamp, or overlook the wrong name. I just had more time to see. She paused. Her gaze shifted to her mother. Layla's head bowed slightly, both in gratitude and humility. Sheikh Nasser studied the girl in silence, his face unreadable. Then, with deliberate care, he nodded once. Truth spoken without pride is the hardest to ignore. Khalid shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. But he did not speak. Elsa lowered her eyes again, folding her hands tighter. Her words had not been a performance. They had been her truth, offered with the quiet dignity of someone who understood the value of silence. Around the table, men and women accustomed to wealth, power, and speed of decision sat in rare reflection. A child had reminded them of something they had forgotten: patience and the humility to see clearly. Layla exhaled slowly. For the first time, she did not feel like a shadow in the room. She stood straighter, her daughter's words lifting her just as much as they had the crowd. The lesson had been shared, not in long speeches, but in the few words that could not be denied. The chamber was changed, and so were the people within it. The day ended not in noise, but in silence. A carriage brought them back to the narrow street they still called home. The air smelled faintly of rain, the cobblestones dark with dampness. Layla unlocked the door, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion, but also from something else, an unfamiliar lightness in her chest. Elsa followed close, carrying two things that did not belong to their old life: a thick envelope, heavy with papers, and a folded certificate stamped with the seal of Sheikh Nasser. The room they entered was modest, almost bare. The wooden chairs were worn smooth, the curtains patched with careful stitches. Yet tonight it felt different, as though the walls themselves breathed with relief. Layla set her mop and janitor's uniform on the small kitchen table. She stared at it for a long time, then placed one hand gently upon it. For years it had been both her burden and her shield, a symbol of survival. Tonight, it felt like the closing of a chapter. She folded it carefully, smoothing the fabric with her palm, and tucked it into the bottom of a drawer. Her eyes glistened, but she did not cry. Elsa stood quietly in the doorway, holding the scholarship letter. Her blonde hair caught the dim light of the single lamp. She clutched the papers not with excitement, but with the solemnity of someone who knew their meaning. This was not just opportunity. It was freedom from fear, from debt, from invisibility. She walked to her mother, placing the envelope on the table. "It's ours," she whispered. Layla turned, meeting her daughter's eyes. No words came. She simply gathered the girl into her arms, holding her close, as though to anchor this fragile, miraculous moment. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full, with memory, with loss, with unspoken gratitude. Outside, neighbors walked past their door, unaware of the transformation happening within. Tomorrow, the world might know. But tonight, it was theirs alone. Elsa leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "You never stopped," she said softly. "That's why I didn't either." Layla pressed her lips to her daughter's hair. "And you saw what I could not," she answered. The lamp flickered, shadows bending across the walls. The two of them stood in their small, fragile home, no longer just a janitor and her child. They were something else now, respected, recognized, unbroken. Greatness had risen from a place no one had thought to look. And in that quiet room, under the thin roof that had sheltered both hardship and hope, dignity was finally restored. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.